Hello, I'm Mark Thomas. Welcome to session 7 of our studies on the Lord's Prayer. The 5 most well-known, most memorized and most recited verses in the Bible. In the previous 6 sessions, we've looked at each of the 6 requests and petitions that make up the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 to 13. In this final session, I want to spend a few minutes reminding ourselves of some of the key points and seeing that this prayer is both a prayer for the present and for the future, a prayer to continue to pray, and a prayer to inspire us to pray more. So, make sure you've got a Bible in front of you and turn to Matthew chapter 6, where you can see the verses 9 to 13, and you'll be able to look at what I'm referring to, and also check up the other references that I'll mention as we go along. So, the Lord's Prayer. Jesus invites us to pray for the intervention of God. It's a prayer for the future, that God, in all his fullness, holiness, would reign in our midst. And all the features of his righteous ruling would be our experiences too, including the ultimate deliverance from evil. But this is not just fantasy escapism, it's also a prayer for the future and a prayer for the present. We are indicating a willingness, indeed a longing, for our actions to be consistent with his will in the here and now, reorientating our lives around his rule and reign, aligning ourselves, our thoughts, our actions to his purpose and his will. So it's a prayer for the future and a prayer for the present. In session 1, we looked at the phrase right at the beginning, "Our Father who is in heaven." God is immediately revealed as the Father figure, but it's more than just a figure of speech. It reflects a real relationship. So in the New Testament, we see that Jesus has a relationship with the one he calls Father, and the disciples are regarded as being in a relationship with your Father, in the sense of the privilege of adoption, which of course leads to expectations in terms of character and behaviour. Although at this stage in the Lord's Prayer, the focus is not so much on our behaviour, but on the character of God, our Father. It's clearly the person, the one who shows tender care for his children. For, as it says in verse 8 of chapter 6, he knows what we need before we ask him. And this prayer unites us, for there is an ourness assumed in this prayer, a togetherness in this praying. This is the one we know, even though he is located in heaven, which, if we understand it correctly, as being the place where he has access to everyone, in every place, then he is our Father in every place, including in this place. Hallowed be your name. Session 2. Holy be your name. Let your holiness be recognized. The holy, holy, holy God from beginning to end, the Holy One. And it's a holiness that calls out holiness and obedience in us, thereby reflecting the character of our Father. Eugene Peterson, his phrase here is, "Reveal who you are." That's quite a good explanation, I think, of this line. And I mentioned in our study in session 2 a poem from Malcolm Guite called "Hallowed by Thy Name." And it has this wonderful description of God. The name that heals the sick and binds the broken, whose living glory calls the dead to rise. Hallowed be your name. Session 3, we studied the phrase, "Let your kingdom come, let your will be done on earth as in heaven," one of the longest requests in the prayer. And the Old Testament gives us the background confirmation that we need that God rules as Lord and King, which means that he has a kingdom. And thus this prayer request becomes, "Let your rule, let your ruling, let your reigning come." And we ask the question, well, when will it come? Well, the kingdom of God is already here, as Jesus says, but not yet in its fullness. There is a present and a future dimension, the one relating to the other as we lean into the future, standing on tiptoes, eager to see what God is bringing to birth. Thus, when we're praying this prayer, we're praying for the total transformation of everything we know, for the radical defeat and uprooting of evil, for heaven and earth to be brought together at last. It's the prayer of willing obedience to the Father's will. Session 4 in our studies took us to the shortest request in the prayer: give us this day our daily bread. And we noted the generous provision of God throughout history, stretching back into the Old Testament to the time of the Exodus, when God provided manna in the desert. That's something that's celebrated in the Psalms in the Old Testament. For example, Psalm 78, verse 24, we quoted, "He rained down manna for the people to eat. He gave them the grain of heaven." And the daily nature of the request evidently reveals our continuously repeated dependence on God's provision. And that feature, dependence on God, along with the simplicity, simply for bread, are perhaps the two clearest messages to be drawn from this particular request. It's a request for our needs, not for our greeds, and it thereby contains the challenge to acknowledge our dependence on God, and is a call to simple and humble simplicity. Session 5 is "Forgive us our debts, as we have also forgiven our debtors." The Old Testament background to this is also in Exodus chapter 34, where we have a wonderful description of the character of God. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious one, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. There are many other examples in the Old Testament. We looked in that study at Psalm 32 and also mentioned the book of Jonah. There's also the New Testament angle to this request. We noted the parables of the unforgiving servant in Matthew 28 and the parable of the two debtors in Luke chapter 7, where the language of cancelling debts is linked with the forgiveness of sins. Also, what's interesting and challenging about this particular request is the fact that to include our forgiveness of others in the forgiveness request that we asked of God is to acknowledge that the forgiveness that we receive from God comes with expectations. While the forgiveness of God is unmerited, Christians are still obliged to live properly in relationship with others. Forgiveness of others is an act of profound subversiveness in a culture of dog-eat-dog revenge. And actually, that makes the Christian message and this prayer very radical, going on the offensive to address offences, of course, in the power and strength of Christ. Then there was the final session, section 6, with the final phrase, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." One request with a reinforcement. The Old Testament background to this, well, historically we can look to Jeremiah as he witnesses to the goodness and protection of God. Jeremiah 29 verse 14, "I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you." That's the historical background. The worship background is provided by the Psalms, of course, notably Psalm 91, which declares the power of God to conquer evil. The Psalms also provide the words of invitation from us to God. So, for example, Psalm 26, verse 2, "Prove me, O Lord, and try me. Test my heart and mind." That's followed up in the New Testament by the exhortation from the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 13. "Examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves." So, the prayer that we be not led into temptation is not so much a desire to circumvent the trials that come to us from God, but rather to register our awareness of our own frailty and weakness, that we're part of an ongoing spiritual battle, and that we can only withstand the temptation and the forces of evil by staying connected to God, relying on his power and strength. We also mentioned this quote from Stanley Hauerwas and William Willimon. Evil is a threatening power, though a defeated one. And Craig Blomberg's translation of this phrase is rather attractive to me. Don't abandon us to temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So, there you have it. A quick reminder, summary of our studies in the Lord's Prayer. Well, that's the end of session 7 and the last in our series of video studies. So, thanks very much for joining me. If you've got any questions about the Lord's Prayer, do drop me a line or leave a comment underneath and I'll endeavour to answer your question. But until then, just remember to keep praying to our Father, and God bless.